So this video is going to introduce two different ways that you can add color to your grayscale painting. The first is super easy and fast, but it doesn't give you a lot of control. So if it doesn't look exactly like what you want, you're kind of stuck with it. The second method gives you lots of control, but it is a little more confusing to learn and it takes a bit longer to do. If you already know that you don't plan on doing much digital painting after this, I would honestly just stick with the first version and don't even worry about learning gradient maps. Alright, for the easy method, you're going to create a new layer. You're going to place that layer above the folder that has your grayscale art in it and on top of any adjustment layers you might have already added to it. Make it a clipping mask to that group, and then you're going to change the blend mode to color. Then you're going to switch to a fairly large brush with a soft edge. And make sure your opacity is set to 100, but turn the pressure sensitivity on. Make sure it's not on for size. Now your reference apple is probably still black and white, so you need to go up to that reference folder, open it, and then hide the black and white adjustment layer, and then you should see it in color. Then you're going to sample colors directly from the reference apple. Sample one area at a time and then paint that color directly onto your color layer. Where the colors meet, you can use less pressure to kind of blend them together, but that probably won't be a big deal because the colors here are all very similar. Because this layer is set to color blend, it won't really change your underlying values very much. You can shrink your brush to get smaller areas if you like, but that's basically all there is to this technique. Just fill the apple up with the colors from the original. That's really all there is to this technique, so if you don't plan on going on and doing more digital painting, then I would just stop the video here and use this technique to paint your apple and your other simple object. If you want to learn the more advanced technique, stick around. So gradient maps give you a lot more control over your color, but it does mean that you need to know a little bit about color theory to really make it work. So go down to the button that lets you create a new adjustment layer, and under the options, make sure you click Gradient Map. Not gradient, that's different. Gradient map. Make sure this layer is above the layer with your grayscale values. And in the properties window, I want you to change the option from procedural to classic. Then click the little colored bar. That's going to open the gradient editor. Now yours will look a little different than mine, but all we really care about is this bar at the bottom. And I'm going to need to explain a little bit about how this works because you really have to understand that bar to understand this technique. Alright, so to understand this bar, I want you to imagine that above it is another bar that goes from pure black on the left to pure white on the right. And what Photoshop is doing is scanning your grayscale image, and it's matching the level of black and white to whatever color is directly below it on the gradient bar. So anything that's pure white in your grayscale image is going to be replaced with this teal color. Anything that's pure black in your grayscale image is going to be replaced with this purple color. And it does that for every value in between. This sphere was originally black and white, but now the white highlight's been replaced by teal and the black shadow is now purple. So you can basically tell what color any gray is going to be replaced with just by looking under that gray on the gradient bar. Now, that black and white bar is not normally there, so you kind of have to get used to imagining it in your head. But that's what the bar is doing. And knowing that is going to allow you to control your colors. Alright, so I'm going to show you an example of this technique in the way I would actually use it, and not on the apple, because the apple has really saturated colors, and this technique actually is a little harder to use with those kind of colors. I'll explain why at the end. Okay, so the first thing I do is set up the gradient map, make it a clipping mask to the folder that has all of my grayscale art. I turn the smoothing value to 0. I make sure it's set to classic in the properties window, and then I set the left color stop to pure black and the right one to pure white so that the gradient map doesn't appear to be doing anything at this point. Then I go back into the gradient editor, make sure you don't have the layer mask selected, and then I click under the bar somewhere in the center, and that will create a new color stop. Double click that to open the color picker window, and then I'm going to look for a color on my reference that's halfway between white and black. Let me just explain quickly a couple things about the way color works in Photoshop. So the color picker window shows a little circle around the color that you've currently selected. As that circle moves towards the top left, that means the color is getting more whiter. As it moves towards the bottom of the square, it's becoming more black. As it moves towards the right, it's becoming more saturated and less gray. In real life, most colors tend not to be fully saturated. Okay, so going back to our face, I'm trying to sample a color from the face that is somewhere right in the center of the color picker. Not too saturated, not too light, not too dark. Once you've found that spot, hit OK. Then we're going to create a new color stop halfway between that one and pure black. Double click that stop, and now we're going to try to sample a color that is pretty dark. So something that is 3/4 of the way towards the bottom of the color picker window. Once you find that, hit OK again. And now we're going to make a new color stop that's halfway between the middle and the white. And now sample from your reference to find something that's halfway between the middle of the box and the top of the box. You can keep adding as many color stops as you want, and if you accidentally add one you don't want, just click and pull down and it'll disappear. But I think these 5 are good enough for us. So now what you're going to do is slide these color stops around until the range of values looks correct. If the face is looking a little bit dark, shift some of the boxes to the left. If it's looking too bright, you can shift some to the right. This gives you complete control, and you can always go back and reopen these gradients at any point. You can also save them if you get one that you really like. Gradient maps always come with a layer mask attached, so if the gradient color is affecting things you don't want, like the eyes in this case, you just select the layer mask and paint black over that area. As a last step, it's not a bad idea to add a color blended layer on top, just to paint in areas of the face or whatever you have that are slightly different colors, like the pink in the cheeks and the flush in the lips, things like that, the colors of the eyes. Those small things can be done with a very subtle color blending layer set to a low opacity. Now, let me just explain why this method may not work real well for the apple. That's because super saturated colors are actually darker in value than average colors. If you look at the color picker box in black and white, you can see the strip along the right where things are super saturated is also a bit darker. So if you pick a super saturated red in your gradient map as your middle color, it's actually going to make the apple much darker than you want it. If you look in the color picker window, there's actually a value next to the L here, the luminance value, that tells you how bright the color is. If you type that number into the location field in the gradient editor, it will move the box to the right level of gray, but that will make it hard sometimes to put your boxes spread out the way that you want them. The best thing to remember is that if you pick really saturated colors, you're going to have to move that control box quite a bit to the left. Okay, so this is a pretty thorough introduction to gradient maps, enough that you can now get out there and experiment. Try them out, and you can figure out which techniques work best for you.